Hey everybody, so this is my 1981 CB750K cafe build. A few months into the pandemic, I decided to buy a climber manual, watch a bunch of YouTube videos, and see what I could do. And here's the journey in under 10 minutes. This is what she looked like before. Not a bad looking bike, but there's a lot of clunky metal and excess crap, and I had a little vision about 5 years ago and had to give it a go and see what I could do. The initial stages were my best friend Bishop, so that's Shannon, who had experience on bikes, and that's Bishop, whose bike it was. That's me wearing Shannon's stupid helmet. So the first thing we did was cut off the seat to make room for a hoop, the handlebars and all that excess metal, replace the old Johnny 5 looking gauges with some simple LED gauges from Dime City Cycles, and put on clip-on handlebars. We took the bike back to my place and I temporarily replaced this beautiful seat Bishop just had custom made, but it was not the look I was going for. I bought the seat with a detachable cowl, but I decided to make a seat in the end. So I replaced the main fuse, bought a lead acid battery to get it running, put on temporary lights with a new flasher relay, did a full carburetor rebuild. I had to do it twice because the climber manual only walks you through the main components, and I had a high idling issue I couldn't figure out. So a second time I took everything apart, I found more issues. There's the vacuum issue. The mechanic who previously cleaned the carbs didn't notice this vacuum issue and put in 170 jets, which were ridiculously huge, but then it was leaking gas. So I used slow motion video to figure out where. It also had a binding issue on one of the butterfly valves, so I filed it down and it did the trick. So I had to take the carbs apart again and put new seals where the carbs attach, and it took care of the leak. She starts up. Yay! But still the high idle. I bought new boots and clamps, hoping that would help, and they sent the wrong ones, but I got it sorted. I upped the jets from the OEM size slightly to account for the new AirPods I put on, and replaced the vacuum and accelerator pump diaphragms, and high idle gone. Awesome. Then on to syncing the carbs, also installed new pilot jets and did my best to get the fuel air mixture right. Got all custom length cables from Motion Pro, new spark plugs, did a compression test, compression good. Installed a new master cylinder for the front disc brakes and a new brake line assembly, more on brakes later. Checked the valve clearances and they were all too tight. I also adjusted the cam tension, changed the oil and filter, and replaced the fuel petcock and filter plus a new fuel line. I changed out all the shims to allow the perfect amount of valve clearance, changed out the valve cover gasket, and found that many of the holes were stripped, so I had to get a Healy coil kit to fix that. I also changed out all the cover gaskets, which as you can see are basically paper that rips easily, I found out. On to measuring for a hoop, got a hoop with LED lights, replaced the rear shocks and license plate bracket, and had a battery tray welded with the hoop by the guys at Melrose Moto. I bought a new muffler and then wrapped the exhaust with fiberglass insulator, sprayed the wraps, and reinstalled the exhaust with new copper crush gaskets, and added a small baffler silencer to the muffler to try to be a good neighbor. Round 1 done. With the lockdown in full swing, I figured why not try my hand at the rear end. That didn't sound right. So I removed the chain guard, the rear drum brake, the rear wheel, and the rear swing arm. With the rear wheel removed, I then cut all the spokes, which I should have done after disassembling the hub due to leverage, but live and learn. I cleaned, inspected, and lubricated the rear swing arm bearings, then painted the swing arm. I also cut the passenger foot pegs and mounts off, filled and painted them to make room for rear sets later. I then removed the crankcase cover to find this. On to disassembling the drum brake. Ooh, that's a lot of asbestos. I disassembled the rear hub, removed the bearing retainer and bearings, ordered a new set of sealed bearings from All Balls Racing and damper rubbers from vintage CB750.com. Getting those bearings out was fun. I removed the clutch sprocket using the old chain, cleaned, degreased, and polished the bejesus out of that crankcase under the bike. I also disassembled and cleaned the oil pump and oil strainer, path body, and pressure relief valve, and reinstalled with new gaskets. Then I sent off the rear end parts to the powder coater. Installed new brake shoes, lubing everything just right, eventually adjusting the rear brake lever height and free play while setting the rear brake switch. I installed all new bearings, seals, and retainers, more fun, heat, grease, and banging. I made my own tool this time to tighten the bearing retainer. I installed and lubed up a new chain, changed out the old crankcase breather system with some air filters, put in the new dampers, got a new wheel and spokes from Buchanan's, love those guys. I fashioned a new return spring and installed a set of rear sets from Cognito Moto. Round 2 in the books. Now the manual says rebuilding the caliper requires special tools and experience. Caliper service should be entrusted to a Honda dealer or a brake specialist. Nah. Time to order a jack, remove the exhaust again, and move on to rebuilding the front end, starting with disassembling the front brake caliper. Eesh. So with no instructions to guide my way, we're off. That's me pretending to use the force to remove the caliper piston for the camera, but really I'm just pumping the brake handle until she pops out. And with a little friendly persuasion, success. So I removed the wheel, the bearings, seals, and retainers, remembering to cut the spokes to the wheel after. Back to the caliper rebuild, removing the bleeder valve, O-rings, seals, dust covers, brake pads, spring and shim, and then finding this delicious congealed mess inside. What is that, flan? I gave it a very intense cleaning after having a little bit of fun for the camera. Yeah. Remove the front axle, speedometer housing and drive dog, and with some leverage from a pipe, the flange bolts and brake disc. Onto the front forks. The climber manual also states that the front suspension uses a spring-controlled, hydraulically damped, air-assisted telescopic fork, and that disassembly should be entrusted to a Honda dealer because it requires the use of special tools in the hydraulic press. So I found a couple of videos online and went to town. Removed the speedometer, handlebars, throttle, master cylinder, controls, key switch, and onto disassembly of the actual forks. First I had to release all the air before disconnecting the air hoses and fork caps, or we'd have a geyser of fork oil. Now, onto the steering head assembly. In hindsight, I think the steering head, bearing, and races were actually fine, but since we're in there, let's just replace the whole thing with an all-balls kit, which was really fun. I had to buy more special tools for that. It was horrible. My God, getting the spring back on the center stand was hard. I tried ratchet straps to no avail, and then after maybe 5 tries, I got it with this brake spring tool. Installed new races and bearings, got my parts back from the powder coaters, cut the fork springs by 50 mil, and added a 2-inch spacer to shorten the forks. Used this tape method to install the new fork seals and fashioned a bracket to attach the muffler to the rear sets. However, the kickstand lever was now hitting the rear set brake pedal, so I had to cut it off and have it welded. Installed new all-balls wheel bearing, installed the triple tree steering head, new shortened forks, aired them up to 15 psi, reinstalled the clip-ons and reassembled and installed the front wheel with the new rim from Buchanan's. I still love those guys. Rebuilt the damn caliper with all new boots, seals, and caliper piston. Ain't it a thing of beauty? Reconnected the master cylinder, installed brand new brake pads, put end caps in the bar that was once the handlebars, put in new brake fluid not recommended for consumption, bled the lines, aligned the wheels, and voila, new brakes. Round 3 done. On to the bodywork, starting with the seat. I started out tracing the shape of the seat with parchment paper, transferred the shape to cardboard, bought a bunch of florist foam blocks, glued them together, and with a kitchen knife, wood plane, and rasp file, began to make a mess and shape that turkey. I wanted a long seat hump anyway, but due to the battery location and height, I had to make sure I had plenty of room to clear the battery. This was the initial shape I came up with, and I wrapped it in painter's tape, but I thought it looked big, buggy, and Batmobile-y, so I removed the tape, reshaped and retaped, and I was stoked with the final design. On to fiberglassing. This is my first time doing it, so of course I had to pick a super complex design, including an underside tail. Between the second and third layer, I drilled, glued, and fiberglassed in a couple of bolts, washers, and a couple of tabs to firmly attach the seat. A few more layers, and
this stuff is very stinky.
I also made a secondary pan under the seat to fit the bike snugly, and then fiberglassed the two together, then filling and sanding. I then had to make a fiberglass seat pan because neither auto upholstery places I went to would make one, so I figured I'd go ahead and do the foam exactly as I wanted while I was at it. I shaped 1-inch firm marine foam, glued and wrapped, then added this blue gel cooling layer for my booty, glued and wrapped, but then the upholsterers told me it was hard to upholster a gel layer because it slides off, so I added a final layer of upholstery foam. If only I had a sewing machine. I got rid of the Honda badges on the side of the tank and accidentally punctured the damn tank drilling, fixed that, and filled in the gaps to make the tank smooth. I rebuilt the gas cap lock with its microscopic springs and had it powder coated. Here I'm experimenting with the shape of the bikini fairing or fly screen with dry erase marker until I love the shape because I think the standard shape is a little dorky. I then had to make these extra guides on the side out of fiberglass to rest on the new headlight mount and then fill and sand. Bodywork done, on to electrical. First I took a ton of pictures, got rid of everything, made a wiring diagram using the M unit, secured my battery location, installed some brackets, foam, and a strap. Installed a new charging system by Vape with a lithium reg rec. Started drilling into my electrics tray to route wiring and set up my soldering station. Got a few new crimpers, connectors, a wiring kit, M-unit blue, lumen tape from Revival Cycles, and installed the new starter solenoid. Made new cables for the battery, ground in starter to account for the battery distance, drew a little face on the red starter connector, named him Billy, and connected the starter. You comfy, Billy? Now routed the wiring from the switches and lights back to the M unit. Sorting out the spark units was the most difficult part, but I truly enjoyed the wiring process. Got power to the M unit with no shorts, onto prepping the wiring for the loom and tape to make it all nice and pretty. Cleaned it up and made it nice and pretty. Brought all the body parts down to A&J Auto Body and Paint, gave them the design, and they crushed it. Beautiful job, Alex. I hand-painted most of the frame and half the engine, hooked up bar end mirrors with turn signals, new headlight and horn, tested everything with the M-Unit Blue app, and we're golden. I probably left out about 500 things, and I don't want to work on another bike for like another decade, but it was a pleasure, and there she is in all her glory.